Hello everybody, how's everyone doing? Good. Good. So I'm going to start off, I've been around a little bit longer so you get to see the old stale work, and then when John's up you can see all the cool fresh stuff. So my name is Erik Klimisch. That's not a good sound. Sorry. Let's see. Okay, maybe I'll have to ditch this. It was working just a minute ago. Okay, so Senior Design Manager at Kia Design. We are located down the road in Irvine, California. Kia also has 3 other global design centers, one in Germany, one in China, and of course our headquarters in South Korea. Here's some pictures of our building. It's a very nice modern building. Has a lot of glass, so there's a lot of natural light. It's a great place to work and also to design cars. Here's my design career in one slide. I graduated CCS with an industrial design degree, and I immediately started working at Ford Motor Company. I was there a total of 18 years, but that was in 2 separate parts. The first 13 years I worked on these projects. A number of production vehicles as well as concept vehicles. Also at Ford, I worked on a lot of projects that were either canceled or put on the back burner. I'm only showing pictures of vehicles that actually made it into production or were shown at auto shows. So after my first 13 years at Ford, I got an opportunity to join an internet company during the dot-com boom. This company was called Model E. I was there for exactly 1 year until the dot-com bust, and I came back to Ford in my position as design manager, and I worked on a few more production cars for another 5 years until I was contacted by Kia to join their new studio in Irvine, California. So I jumped at the chance and worked on a number of cars as design manager. These are images of all the vehicles that I oversaw as manager that did make it into production, as well as concept cars. And you can just see that there's about 3 times as many vehicles that I worked on at Kia compared to Ford, because Kia, they just don't cancel projects. They're very efficient and things go very quickly. Most of my time at Kia has been as a design manager for exterior. There was a time where I did both interior and exterior. The last 5 years I've been primarily focused on interior. The red rectangles are projects that have been approved for production, but they haven't been unveiled to the public, so I can't show those. Also worked on a number of concepts while at Kia. When I joined the company, we were doing concept cars about 1 every year up until about 2020. When we added a number of EVs to the car line, so our production work has just become too demanding in our studio, and we just don't do concept cars anymore. Like Wesley said, I taught for a total of 9 years, 7 years teaching transportation design classes at CCS. I then taught at the University of Michigan teaching digital design modeling classes. So going back in time, here I am as a teenager. I was very much into cool cars, and my dad worked at General Motors, and he would bring home the latest sporty car on occasion. My dad was a PhD chemist by trade, and he was also an artist, as shown in this advertisement on the right side with some of his paintings behind him. But his claim to fame was he led the team that developed the catalytic converter for automobiles. And among his peers, he earned the name Captain Catalyst, and this is a picture of a magazine article that they wrote about him at the time. So, as I said, I went to CCS, and on the first day of orientation, they gathered all the design students into one of the big rooms for the ID department, and all the department chairs came and gave their spiel to the students. And when the transportation design chair came in, the first thing he did was ask the students who, if they were interested in becoming a car designer, to raise their hand. And there were about 100 incoming freshmen in this room, and 60 of us raised their hand. And he said, that CCS only graduates 12 to 15 students a year in car design, so there was going to be some attrition. So that was an eye-opener. So I knew I had my work cut out for me if I wanted to be a car designer. And I worked really hard on my very first project. Here's a sketch of that, and I was pretty proud of it until I put it up on the wall and realized I hadn't done my due diligence like some of the other students who had researched some of the car design sketching techniques, and my work was not among the best. I thought my instructor was very generous. He gave me a B- on the project. So after that, I put my shoulder to the wheel, so to speak, and worked very hard. I did improve quite a bit by the end of my first year. Here's a picture of my first year presentation wall. And there were 60 students, as I said, that wanted to be in the car design program. They wanted to cut us down to 25 students. I did not make the cut initially. So they encouraged me to go into product design, which I also liked, and I was prepared to do that. But then between first and second year, I was contacted over the summer by the school. They said that they were bringing in another instructor to teach car design, and of course I was interested in being in that class. So I was in that class, and by the end of the second year, they made another cut, and I made that cut to go into third year. I don't have a picture of my third year presentation wall, but I do have a picture of my internship at General Motors. It was a summer internship. I worked half the time in truck design and the other half in the Pontiac studio. And this was my final presentation. It was a full-size tape drawing of a Trans Am concept. So I made the final cut into the senior class. There were 13 students in our class. I think there's only 12 pictured here. See Paul Snyder on the end there, John?
Wow.
So he was in my class.
I still had hair then.
So if you couldn't see me, I'm the student with the poor posture. So here's some pictures of my senior design portfolio. And here's some of those pieces on my final presentation wall. And when we finished our senior year, we had a room inside of one of the buildings at CCS, and all the car design students put their work up on walls, and over the course of a week, car companies came through to look at our work, talk with the designers, pretty much do on-the-spot interviews. And after the week, we found out if any of us had received offers. And many of us did. Fortunately, I was one of 3 students who got the most coveted offer from the big 3 car companies. That was GM, Ford, and Chrysler at the time. 2 of us got offers from Ford, Paul Snyder and myself, and one of the other students got an offer from GM. So to summarize my time at CCS, from my first sketch to one of my final sketches, and then I started to work at Ford Motor Company for the first 13 years of the 18 years. My first project was the Crown Victoria, the next generation, and I only worked on this project for a short time. I think it was just a couple months. If you can't see me, there I am. I got into the group photo. I was really excited about that. I was about 23 at the time. And here are some pictures, just some random sketches while a designer at Ford Motor Company. The 3 on the left and top are digital sketches. The one on the lower right is a vellum sketch. Here are some sketches that I've done at Kia. As a design manager, I really don't sketch that much, but there are times when I need to pitch in. Here are some side view studies of a small car. So I want to talk about my early days at Ford Motor Company and also full-size tape drawings. This was a critical part of the process for a car designer when I started out at Ford. We just don't do them anymore because of computers. But in the old days, it was a really neat process. You would sketch on any given project for a few weeks up to a month, and after a few reviews, you would then start your tape drawing. And what we would do is a studio of about 5 or 6 designers. We'd have these big rolling boards. We'd put them at the end of the studio. We would pin our best sketches up along the top, and then we would roll out the package, which was all the engineering information of the car that we were trying to redesign, and then we would roll a big sheet of Mylar over the top. We would stretch it out nice and tight, and then we would start our tape drawings. Here were two of my first tape drawings at Ford. This was a Cougar and a Thunderbird. Each one of these took probably, several days to complete. And while you're taping your lines, you're discussing with the engineers, understanding what areas you can take liberties on and other areas where you have to adhere to. So it's a really good process. And then once you finish your tape drawing, you add a little bit airbrush to give it some realism. Then we move them into the showroom at the time, and our top management then reviews the tape drawings, and they select the ones that they like the best to go into full-size clay models. Later on, I perfected my tape drawing technique to be much faster. Each one of these tape drawings were completed in one day. The top one is a Mustang. The bottom one was a T-Bird. I also had the opportunity to work on a few concept cars while at Ford. The first one was the Mercury Concept 50, and this was when I was at Ford for only about a year and a half. And it's always a privilege to work on a concept car. They're a lot of fun. They get done really quick. This one was a pretty easy job because we were to take a Ford Probe and turn it into a Mercury. So we were only able to change the front and rear view, but it was still a fun project to work on. Another concept that I had influence on was the 1991 Ford Connecta. It was an electric vehicle concept. This was done by our studio in Italy, but 3 years prior, I was in the advanced design studio on another project, and I created this tape drawing, which was, they really liked this kind of undulating roof, and they took a picture of this and sent it to Italy, and it was used to influence the Connecta concept. When I was in Italy on foreign assignment, I was there for about four months. I worked on the Ghia Zig and Zag, and this was a van and a roadster based off of the same lower through that main body line. I worked mostly on the roadster. I did a number of sketches, and this was my full-size tape drawing at the end of my foreign assignment, and that had some influence on the final roadster concept. Some other projects while at Ford. One of the more important production projects was the 1997 Ford F-Series. Up until then, the F-Series was very square, pretty much a brick. And this was the time at Ford where the aero look was the big trend. It was also the big trend throughout the industry, so Ford wanted to apply that to their best-selling pickup truck. And this was the result. It was a big hit with the public, and here are some of the sketches that I did for that project. Moving on to the late 90s, Ford was having quite a bit of success with their selling of cars, and they had a lot of extra cash, so our CEO went on a buying spree. He purchased Jaguar, Aston Martin, Land Rover, and Volvo. So I was in advanced studio at the time, so I got to work on some Jaguar projects, which was really exciting, and also an Aston Martin project. The one that I worked on the most was a Jaguar based off of the Ford Contour platform. Fortunately, we were able to modify the platform or the package. We were able to lower the roof line, extend the wheelbase, shorten up the front end a little bit, and make it a little bit wider. My tape drawing, as well as another designer's, were selected to go into the full-size clay model. And about the time they were going to go down to one design, we found out the project was canceled. So that was very unfortunate because I felt my design was better at the time. Digital models. So back in the 90s was when Ford first created their first digital design studio, and they called it 2000X because the year 2000 was so far in the future. And this was 1990, and I was one of the first designers who was assigned to this studio to learn this new modeling software. And this software was a precursor to Alias. It was called CDRS by a company called Evans and Sutherland. And it did generate very nice surfaces and beautiful renderings, but it was very tedious to work with. Each time you save the model, it would take over an hour. So you did 2 saves during the day, once at the beginning of lunch and once at the end of the day. And in the morning, you would load it up, and it would take about an hour to load up. And there was no undo function in this software. This was a youth concept that I designed and built in CDRS. I also designed and built an SUV based off of a Ford Escort platform in CDRS. We then ditched CDRS software and bought some seats of Alias Wavefront at the time. And I was very excited to teach myself this new software. We didn't have any formal training, so I took the manuals and went through the tutorials, and based on my experience with CDRS, I learned Alias pretty quickly, and I developed a modeling technique where I could build a model very quickly. Each one of these models was built in the course of a day. I was working on a T-Bird project around that time, so I have some T-Bird concepts. And a Cobra concept was going on at the time. I modeled the Cobra, designed and built it. And then some youth vehicles and another T-Bird. Perhaps the highlight of my Ford career was the Mercury MC4 concept vehicle. This was unveiled in Detroit in 1996. This was what we called a 4-door coupe. It was a very sporty sedan. It was slated to be the flagship of the Mercury brand, and it was very well received. We got the cover of Motor Trend magazine, which was a big deal back then. There was myself and another designer who were generating the sketches on this project, and also the ones that were working on the clay model. Here's a sketch that I did that had influence on the front of the car, and then this vellum sketch influenced the rear of the car. After we finished the clay model, I took the scan data and I constructed the model in Alias so we could animate the side doors and the rear gull wings for a video that we showed at the presentation at the auto show. I also designed and built the road wheel for the concept in Alias. And here are some photographs in New York of the final car. Shortly after that project, I was promoted to design manager, and my first concept project was the P2000 hologram as manager. And I was the only person on this project, so I did all the designing and modeling. Ford wanted to highlight their new hydrogen fuel cell technology, and so I had to build that into the vehicle and make it transparent. Because it was a new technology, they wanted to showcase this concept in a high-tech way rather than a physical model. We were working with a startup tech firm in Austin, Texas, whose expertise was printing hologram tiles. So we had them print a 15-foot long wall, about 6 feet high, and with the image it created this printed hologram effect, which was really neat. We hung it up at the Cobo Hall for the 1997 auto show in Detroit. One of the more exciting production programs that I got to work on at Ford was the 2005 Bronco project. And they resurrected the Bronco name to come up with a legitimate competitor to the Jeep Wrangler, which we hadn't had for a while. And this was a really exciting project. We did a 4-door version and a 2-door version. And this was about the time that I left Ford, and then shortly after I left, the project was canceled. Not because I left, but because of cost reasons. And as you know, 16 years later, Ford finally came out with the redesigned Bronco, which has been a big hit for them. Like I said, at this point, I had the opportunity to join the first internet automotive company. And this was during the dot-com boom, so it was a very exciting time. This company was based in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley, And the CEO of the company was a former Ford exec who I had worked with previously on some projects at Ford. And they had a very complex business plan, which I really don't have time to explain, but part of that plan was that they wanted to create a limited run of like a concept vehicle that they could sell their clients. And I was hired to do, they knew that I had some digital modeling skills. I was hired to do the design work as well as the modeling work. So there was one of my initial sketches. They wanted it to be a high performance utility vehicle, something like a, you know, super Jeep. And the driver was sitting in the center, and there were two passengers, one on each side of the driver, slightly behind him. So I modeled the exterior and the interior. I was inspired by military stealth helicopters for a very aggressive look. I worked down in Huntington Beach with a race car builder called Rod Millen Motorsports. They took my alias data and then built the frame for the vehicle, as well as all the suspension bits. And here's a picture of me presenting an early prototype to my team at Model E, and some pictures on the right of the build of the concept vehicle. Here's the finished product. About this time, we were starting, our funding was getting a little hazy. The dot-com bust had just happened, so we weren't able to spend the money to put a motor in this concept vehicle, but you know, we still kind of had the rest of it finished, and the suspension was fully functional. We did unveil it when the company came out of stealth mode at the Hard Rock Hotel for the SEMA show in the year 2000. But the writing was on the wall, our funding was drying up, and just a few months later we went from 64 employees down to 12. So I took my leave of Model E and came back to Ford in my previous position as design manager, and I worked on a few more production vehicles. The first being the 2006 Ford Explorer. Also managed the Super Duty for 2007 and the Ford Flex for 2009. And this is about the time I was contacted by Kia to join their new studio in Irvine, California. And just a little word about the design process at Kia. As I said, we have 4 global studios, and any given project, all the studios will compete at the same time. And we all start sketching at the same time, and then we build a finished clay model over the period of about 3 months. We then ship our clay models to Korea, where they have a presentation, and then they select the winning design to go into production. And those exteriors and interiors were selected for production. The following slides I'm going to show you are going to focus on concept vehicles that I managed. Those are a lot of fun because they happen real quick, usually about 8 to 9 months from sketch to finished concept vehicle, where a production vehicle can take anywhere between 3 to 4 years when I was at Kia and 4 to 5 years when I was at Ford. So the first concept I managed was the Q. This came out in 2007. We showed this at the Detroit Auto Show, and it earned Kia their very first IDSA Design Award. The following year, we did the Coupe, which was a two-door Forte Coupe teaser concept. We were also working on the production vehicle in the studio, so it was a teaser for that vehicle. In 2009, we designed this open-air activity vehicle based off of the very popular Kia Soul called the Soulster. In 2010, our first plug-in hybrid concept, the Ray. This was unveiled at the New York Auto Show. Here's a picture of a design review in our courtyard when we were in the scale model stage. 2011, we designed the KV7, which was a minivan concept. Had a pretty interesting interior that was more lounge-like rather than a typical minivan. In 2012, a very sporty version of the next-gen Kia Soul. An interesting story about this particular concept. As I said, concept vehicles happen very quickly and you don't have a time to really work things out. One of the more difficult and tricky things to get right is the lighting, the tail lamps, the headlamps, and the fog lamps. And we were really struggling with the headlamps on this vehicle because we wanted a very specific kind of a high-tech small LED look, and we tried LEDs. They weren't giving us the look we wanted. So we were in a meeting one day at the builder, and we noticed they had a drop ceiling, and in the drop ceiling they had these clear plastic covers over the lights, and we really liked the texture in those. So we had them take one of those down and cut a piece out, and we shined light behind it, and that became the lighting effect that we put on the concept car. Here are some pictures of the finished vehicle. 2013, the Cross GT, which was a sport luxury crossover. Here are some digital images of that concept. 2014, we designed the GT4 Stinger, and this was a very exciting project because it was a two-door sports car, and we really pushed hard for our upper management to add this to the Kia car line because we just thought it would be perfect for Kia to have a low-cost, fun-to-drive sports car. And we benchmarked the Subaru BRZ and the Scion FRS as the main competitors of that vehicle. But first, I'll talk quickly about our process for developing a concept car. At the beginning of the year, when we know we're going to be doing a concept car for the year, we ask the designers to create posters to tell a story about what they think would be a really good idea for a concept vehicle. And some of the designers like to do like car magazines. Other designers will do movie posters or just compositions that tell their story. And from these posters, we select the idea that we feel is best. In this case, for the GT4 Stinger, it was a two-door sports car. And then we have the design team to begin sketching. So they sketch for anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks. We then select some of the best sketches to go into the scale model stage, which you see here. We usually do about 4 or 5 scale models for a concept project. We work on those for maybe a month and a half. Then we select one design to go into full size, and that becomes the concept. Here it is in a few different stages in courtyard reviews. We then send the data to a local car builder, and they will build the frame out of steel. They make the body out of carbon fiber, and then they machine and mill out all the bits and pieces that go in the interior and the exterior, and put it all together to make this final concept. And it happens very quickly. Once the car is finished, we rush it out to a location for photography. In this case, we took it out to our proving grounds test track in the Mojave Desert for video and photography. And then it went to the auto show, and the PR department wanted us all to dress up in black suits so we looked like the Reservoir Dogs, which was kind of strange. We didn't understand it because that was an extremely violent movie, but there we were, and we were with the vehicle when they unveiled it to the public. Perhaps the highlight of my career at Kia was the Kia Telluride. I was the design manager of the concept interior and exterior, as well as the production Telluride interior and exterior. And here are some pictures of the concept vehicle. These were taken at our studio. Here's some pictures at the Detroit Auto Show. It was very well received, and shortly thereafter, we started the production Telluride, and that has been a huge hit for Kia. In fact, it won Kia their very first Motor Trend Vehicle of the Year, and there I am standing next to the car at the awards party. The last concept vehicle that I worked on was the Habanero in 2019. I managed just the interior of this vehicle, although the exterior came out, really cool. And this was which led to the current Nero production car. But we really pushed the interior, and that looks nothing like the Nero's interior. It was a little bit more advanced. So that's my work at Kia. I'll go quickly just to talk about some of the process that we use. Quickly with clay model development. Car design is one of the last design disciplines that still uses clay. It's not like your ceramic clay. It never really gets hard. It's always pliable. But in order to apply it to the car, we heat it up to 140 degrees, and the modelers then will smear it on the car, let it cool down, and they'll scrape it with clay modeling tools. A clay model is not all clay. Otherwise, it would be extremely heavy. We start with a steel armature, and we put a wood platform on top of that. The steel armature holds the axle, so you can move the clay model around. We add a lot of blocks of foam. That's the main area to keep the model light. And then we'll mill back the foam to about 40 millimeters, and we'll apply clay on top of the foam and then mill that back, and that gives us our clay model. It'd be too expensive and way too much if it was all clay. Here are some modelers using various tools working on clay models. We also have a very large industrial mill on the right, which can mill out a full-size clay model in a day. We also have a number of portable mills in the studio. So if we just want to mill out a portion of the car, maybe a mirror or a fender, we can do that very quickly with the portable mills. Tape is a very key way for the designers and the modelers to work in clay. The designers will use the tape in reviews to correct design lines, to create graphics, and the modelers will use it also in the same manner. And then when we get to the clay model to an advanced stage, we'll want to see it in color. And rather than spray paint the whole model with paint, it would be very difficult to then peel all that paint off. We use Dynoc. And this comes in large rolls that the sculptors will soak in water, and they'll peel off the painted area, and they'll stretch it out over the clay, and it can move around and stretch, and then once it dries, it sticks to the clay model. And then after the review, we can then easily peel it off. And here are some Dynoc clay models at different stages in design. We'll use roll-up mirrors when we only have half a model design. The mirror will then reflect the side we're looking at, so we can get a symmetric look of the design. And then just a few slides talking about the history of car design. In the old days, 1990s or 1900s to even the 2000s, designers worked with pencils, markers, and paint. Today, obviously, most of the designers work by digital sketching. For modeling, 1900s to 1930s, they would build a frame out of wood and apply plaster to the wood frame. It was a very time-consuming process, but that's how they did it. In the 1930s, GM introduced clay to the modeling process, and we've been using that ever since. And we also are using digital modeling more and more. For data capture, meaning once you have a model and you want to check it against the engineering package, in the old days we would model the clay over a steel plate that was absolutely square to the world, and we would have a bridge that we could slide down the plate, and it had a horizontal arm that could move up and down, and the sculptors could then read off points, creating sections, and then they would give those points to the engineers. It was a very time-consuming process, but the engineers could then check those points against the engineering package. Today, we can scan a clay model in less than an hour, and the data is much more exact. And like I said, here's a picture of the engineers in the old days. Once they got those points, you'd have a room full of engineers. They would be drawing out the lines, and we would have reviews over at these tables to see how we're doing against the package. And of course, today, it's all done digitally. It's much more efficient. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. So we'll have John set up. And so students, while we're setting up, you should all be thinking about some questions that you might want to ask our designers when we get into our roundtable discussion that will be following this presentation. So take a few moments to write down maybe a few questions that you might want to ask when we get into the next session.
All right. So, all right. Hello, everyone. My name is John O'Loughlin. And to preface this, I guess I'll say I wouldn't have the awesome opportunity to speak to everyone here if I hadn't met your classmate Vadim here randomly in a parking lot while we were getting boba. And I went up to say, oh, that's a cool car you have there. And then we became pretty good friends after that. So very random little interaction, but so I'm not from here, of course. I'm actually from Pennsylvania, a very small town in Pennsylvania called Meadville. We only have about 13,000 people there. There's a little image up there of my hometown. And I'm Irish, I guess genetically. My family, many generations back, is from County Clare in Ireland. And I'll just kind of give just a little bit of background about me. I'm very interested in space and entertainment design, stuff like that. I'm very interested in 3D modeling. So like this is some of the stuff that I've created since I was a student, since I was, in the industry. And then I'll just briefly talk about my interests here. I'm very into cars, which is convenient being a car designer, a transportation designer. But those are the cars that I'm currently kind of tinkering with right now. I have a heavy interest in sort of pulling cars apart and modifying them, which is, I'll talk about this more as I get into some of my work, but it's extremely important that the thing that you're passionate about in a career sense, you also have sort of adjacent passions that make you even better at that career. I'm very into skiing as well, and I have a little bit of music taste down there. I'm very much a metalhead, which most people don't expect, but so that's a little bit about me. So I'll go ahead and start actually before, I went to college for creative studies for college, but I'll start a little bit before that, what really got me interested in design. So this was my first car. My dad and I picked it up for about $2,600, and it needed a little bit of work. And this was a very important item for me in terms of my future, because I learned a lot about how things come apart, how to fix and repair things. I got pretty intimate with the reality of how things are put together and how they function, and this was kind of a very key developmental thing for me. And one of the other things that I got very interested in high school was combat robotics, which sort of at the beginning, a lot of my friends were like, oh, that's really nerdy, you shouldn't do robotics. And then I realized how cool it actually was. And that's right around when I picked up SolidWorks. So I did 3 years of that, and this was our last design. We actually went to our nationals competition with this. It had this spinning weapon up here, this brushless drive. We built our own battery packs and everything. It spun up to about 10,000 RPM. It was actually way more dangerous than I remembered it being. This was quite dangerous. But that was another interest of mine in high school. Many nights I was up till 4 in the morning working on this. And some other things about me, I'm very interested in mechanical things. This is something I built in SolidWorks when I was in high school, just for fun. I was very interested in motors, and I've always been interested in engines and vehicles, so I just kind of tried to put this together in SolidWorks. And this was a very big project for me. So I picked up polygonal modeling when I was about 9 years old. I was using Google SketchUp, and I was making like very simple little airplanes and stuff like that. But my dad introduced me to Modo, which is it's basically like Blender. And I spent, oh man, the better part of half a year to a year making this. It was just something I was very passionate about. You know, the concepts that you had worked on, I was looking at on Google, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. I wonder if I can be a car designer. So I spent a ton of time. I did the exterior, the interior for this, and I built a little scale model. And I brought it to Art Center. I brought it to DAP, which is Design of Art and something in Cincinnati. I went to Cleveland Institute of Art. I went to College for Creative Studies, and College for Creative Studies is where I ended up. They liked my project a lot. They gave me a scholarship, and that's kind of how I got into the more professional car design world. So I'm going to go ahead and start talking about my CCS work. So apologies, this got messed up here. Go all the way to the top. Whoops. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start talking about my early CCS work. And I'm not really going to go into great detail about a lot of my work. What I want you guys to see is the volume of work, but also where I was at as a student. I'm going to be sharing a lot of my thoughts with you about being a student, because I've only been outside of school for about 5 years. And there's some very important key things that I wish I had somebody there to tell me about, that I had to kind of figure out on my own, and I would be very happy to tell you about. So as a freshman, I was obviously very excited about car design, but this was one of our first freshman projects. It was kind of a cable car, and they run everybody through the same project. So it's basically design a speed form and add some function to it. So this was one of the projects. And then another project was design this sort of either 3 or 4-wheeled vehicle. That was the only prompt. It could be 3 or it could be 4 wheels. I chose a 3-wheel vehicle. And this was basically it. Like we went through a couple design reviews, and we sort of created a final rendering. And you know, this body of work was essentially all that you needed to do for CCS for the first year. But I spent a lot of time with upperclassmen, and I heard about internships, and I said to myself, that's something that I really need to do, because college is great when you're learning a lot of the basic skills, but internships, I didn't even know about them. I was like, wow, you can get professional working experience as a student. That's incredible. And I could say I got kind of psyched up about that. So I went further with the project. This is one of the first renderings that I ever did. I spent days on this. I spent a really, really long time. And I generated 3D data of it. I spent a couple months doing that. And I started, you know, spending time with upperclassmen and learning about the whole process of creating these presentation boards and the importance of telling a story, having a really complete sort of interior, exterior design. And I went a bit further yet, because I was, you know, a first-year student, but I'd learned that there was this industry day show, and a lot of people had fifth-scale models, and I was just fascinated by that. And I told myself, I got to have a model on the show. You know, there's no other way that I can kind of get myself out there and show my ambition it was just something that I had to do. So I spent quite a lot of time. I ended up working with the guy that ran the mill at College for Creative Studies, and I spent all my own money. I didn't have any money. I was a student back then. I spent all my money on getting this model milled out. I learned how to paint in the paint shop. I printed, I don't know, 40 or 50 separate parts. And this is a shot of, you know, a couple days before the show. I was up in the studio kind of screwing all this together, and there was the model at the show. So this was after about a year. And what I want to illustrate about this project is that, well, I had a lot of people saying, a lot of peers and a lot of teachers telling me, you know, maybe sleep a little bit more, maybe go out and enjoy yourself a little bit. You don't need to do this. Like, you can slow down a little bit, all right? It's okay. But the point I want to illustrate is, and this is a really valuable thing to consider when you're a student, especially when you're coming towards graduation. When you're hired as a professional designer, you are hired because of you and your individual opinions and your things that you're passionate about. It's sort of breezed through your work. So to me, to sacrifice a couple nights of sleep and maybe not going on vacations and sort of going out on the town, it was worth it because I was able to put myself in this position where there was abundant opportunity. I mean, this was an industry day show, and I'm very glad that I put in all that extra work, and I learned so much in the process. I guess the point I'm trying to get across is, if you're really passionate about something, going those extra 2 or 3 steps, it can be hard, but if you push through and you break into something that you're really excited about, it just does wonders for your future and sets you up on, you meet new people, you're able to be put on the stage where you have even more opportunity than you started. So this was a very, very important project for me, and this is just showing the sort of wall that I had as a freshman during our very first show. So I had that project and then the project on the bottom, and I want to illustrate to you, this is another sort of passion project. One of the points I want to make is that in my body of work here, I would say about half of it was work that was assigned to me as a student, and the other half was stuff that I was just very excited to do, or I wanted to push myself. This was also a freshman project, and man, I really struggled on this because I'd never really properly sketched a car before, and just so many late nights and hundreds of hours getting critiques from everybody. I made a model to sketch over because I just couldn't nail proportion on my own yet, and this ended up making it into my sort of freshman portfolio, and that was another project on my wall there. And I have a couple more little slides of, I threw these together, so I'm kind of pulling this into a whole little point here about my freshman year. I did a couple little slides here illustrating like how I actually engineered that model with the suspension working. I had another project from metal shop class where I was doing a lot of manual machine work in high school, so I made a little pen out of copper, did the drawings for it and everything. And I also designed this tire for a Nitto competition. But to pull all of that together, that was in my sort of first year portfolio, and that got me an internship with this place called Sundberg-Ferar. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's a pretty small little industrial design consultancy in Michigan. And all of the late nights definitely paid off because I did all of these passion projects, and I put myself where I thought I needed to be to meet the right people, and it ended up working out really well. I got my first internship, which was fantastic. It was such a great experience. So this little portfolio, I really want to make a point about classwork, okay? Because I'm sure this is something that you have to deal with as a student. Where do I place my time? And this project I might be excited about, but I don't have a lot of time because I have this course, and this course is kind of dumb, and I don't want to do this work, and it's a waste of time. And it can be kind of a problem, right? Because everybody only has 24 hours in the day, and what do you do with all of this time? Well, this portfolio I want to illustrate. I won't really go into deep detail about it. Just know that these projects, they're all a very similar format. There's sort of a prompt, the brand, the ideology behind the design language, different theme studies, 2-3 themes, some details, and then final renderings. So this was actually my Viscom class. This was my Viscom 3 class. So I was a sophomore at this point. And I am so glad that I had this professor because I remember every time we had a meeting, he would say, if you guys take this class seriously, if you do what I tell you, you're going to get a job. You're going to get an internship after this class. And the problem with this class is, and that a lot of other professors said about this professor, he's like, well, he's a Viscom teacher. Your studio is your main course. You need to focus on your studio, which of course I didn't slack on my studio at all, but I put a lot more effort into this class. And the point that he always tried to get across, sort of this, buyer profile, benchmarking, design language, doing your form studies, picking a successful theme from your form studies, doing final renderings. We did this 4 times. So these were 4 separate projects. Here's a little adventure crossover. Same process. And he said, like, every week, do this. Come in with your design language, what you set out to do with this project. Next week, we're going to do speed form sketches, turn that into a car. Next week, we're going to do sort of mid-level renderings, and then the next week, we're going to do final renderings. Do that every time. And then I'll tell you why at the end, basically. And so I made sure to religiously follow that. A lot of my peers, we kind of came up short with renderings sometimes. Some people dropped the course. It was too much. I need to focus on my studio. But I had a sort of a gut feeling about how important the studio was. And the main thing that this professor emphasized is if you are efficient in that you can, so you have a course that it's not your main course of study, but you still have to do work for it, right? How can you take those projects and those illustrations and those sketches and have every one of them be relevant and useful in your portfolio? Like, you don't want to spend an entire year and only have one project that you're proud of or that you feel is usable. And the point I'm trying to make is, yes, this was only a Viscom course. All of these sketches, everybody was saying, this is just a Viscom course. It's not going to get you anywhere. Viscom is just for practicing, right? But I took it very seriously, and this was my whole portfolio format here for 2016. And I added my little personal project here at the end. Same format, coincidentally. What you set out to design, speed forms, how you sort of sculpt that speed form, car sketches, mid-level renderings, details, final renderings. It sort of hammered into my brain this format. And I used this portfolio as the portfolio I gave to GM as a sophomore. And I got an internship with GM as a sophomore, which a lot of people would say, it's a little rare to get an OEM internship, as kind of a, freshman, sophomore. Some people have done it, but it's rare. But I'm so glad that I took this class very seriously, but I also optimized all the work that I did for all my other classes, because at the end of the day, you really don't want to have stuff that you spend hours and hours on that you just know you're going to throw in the trash. We all have the same 24 hours. It's really, really, really important that you find some way to work that standard class project that everybody has to do into something that can be sort of a personal brand for you, can speak to who you are, and it can fit really well into your portfolio. Like my freshman year, I had, I made a pen. Like, that's not a car, right? It doesn't make any sense. But it shows something that you're passionate about that you put a little bit more time and effort into, and that helped me get an internship. So that was a good use of time. And I know that that's a very pressing thing being a student. It's like, do I work on this English assignment, or do I do this Design 1 form study, or do I work on my website? And this was right at the end of this 2016 portfolio. I designed this tire for Nitto, and it was a little competition. And this ended up kind of making it into my portfolio for that year. And another interesting thing is my dad was saying, you got to do this tire competition. Nobody's going to enter it, You can win it, nobody's going to enter it. I'm like, it's a tire, And then I said, well, you know what? I had this rescue vehicle thing, and the wheel kind of sucks on it. So what if I design the tire for that sand vehicle? And it has this, I'll go through it here real quick. The premise behind this tire is it has this sort of titanium understructure with an electromagnet, and the vehicle is electric. And when the current that goes to the electric motor goes through the tire, it forces those electromagnets apart, and these sand fins basically grow in size. So there's, off throttle and then on throttle. And that was the whole idea behind the tire. And I added it to my little 3-wheeled vehicle. And I ended up winning the Nitto competition, which was fantastic. But that's another great example of maybe you have an assignment, or maybe you have something that's extraneous or extracurricular. How can you fit that into a project that you're currently doing, or how can you supplement it? Basically, I got really obsessed with how can I be as efficient as possible with all the work that I'm doing. Because nobody wants to throw a bunch of sketches in the trash or go through an entire semester and feel like you just can't use this project. So that was from sort of my 2016 era. This is, let me go into this here. So I was actually talking with Vadim about a project that he's working on right now. And this was my junior year studio. And it was Calty that sponsored the studio. And it was basically, the premise of it was, 2040 is the year that you designed for. And the scenario is rural mobility, so not city. Come up with something. And I found this document, it's a really interesting document because I actually have some feedback from the people at Calty about what we were doing. But this is, I think it's an interesting example of how you can you can take something that's, a bit of research, and when you storyboard and get really passionate about even if it's a fictional scenario, if you get very passionate about solving those pain points in this fictional scenario, you can come away with a really cool and successful project. So I did a bit of research on the idea of being able to populate unpopulated areas in the future due to the Internet of Things. If we have Starlink or we have internet everywhere, you don't have to live in a city anymore. You can have, goods and commodities delivered to you, or you can have your own sort of micro societies in rural or harsh areas that are self-sustaining. So that was sort of the idea here. So they said, come up with a story, and I got excited about this because it wasn't the typical design your small microcar for the city in 2045, and it's a little gumdrop or something that kind of goes around and it's autonomous. It was sort of like a different set of challenges. So to kind of set the story out, I illustrated 3 different characters and their importance within their dependence on each other within the scenario. So here I have Russ, the farmer, and in this sort of future farming scenario, what his needs might be in terms of like growing crops, taking his yield and exporting it to the export center, like heavy lifting and stuff like that. I came up with another character in this sort of fictional scenario, illustrated their day in the life. So this person works at this trade center that exports and imports to other rural communities. And what kind of things could I solve for in his life? And the third character, she owns a solar farm on this sort of plot of land, so she provides the energy for the rest of the community. And I thought to myself, okay, if you own a solar farm, what are some pain points that you would need to solve for that, scenario? And I guess the important part about this that I'm trying to illustrate is, during this course, the first half of it I would say was research. Research can be very boring. But it can also be very exciting, and it's extremely exciting when you get passionate about that story and you actually put a little bit of your own personal touch into it. I kind of forced myself to illustrate these scenarios by myself. I'm not going on Google and just pulling a picture and like, well, here's what a solar farm looks like. I created a character, I'm illustrating what they're doing in this scenario, and you're spending time as you're drawing this, you're thinking about what this person could be doing, and that's still research. But it became a lot more interesting. I know my anatomy is horrible. I'm not good at drawing people, but so we basically, and this is reminding me of your project too, Vadim. You're taking a scenario and then trying to solve for it. And even if it's fictional, you can still come up with compelling solutions to it. So we basically, I developed this kind of funky truck architecture where it has a cabin at the front and this big open area in the back. Well, I thought, well, if I have these 3 different characters, I can have 3 different modules to kind of swap in that can solve their own problems. I'll just kind of, breeze through it. I landed on this main idea of the truck frame can be this sort of platform, and then the cabin, you don't, if it's semi-autonomous or fully autonomous, you don't always need to be in the vehicle. So what if it could completely eject its cabin and then you could use it for something else? And then the whole rear area is a module bay. So I designed different little modules for each character, for the farmer, you would need a flatbed with a crane potentially, and for, the solar farmer, a module that has a sort of something to clean the solar panels and service them. And then for the logistics guy, something for his personal effects, because this could also be a vehicle that you take home, that you live with, it comes to your own home. Not only do you use it at work, but it's also your personal vehicle. So, and I just got really excited about the story behind it, and I said, well, let me design this personal kind of helper bot that can also sort of service some of the, a vehicle is a vehicle, right? But if it's going to really integrate with your daily life, you can't have a car like come inside and help you, basically. So it had this deployable little robot that I tried to design it in a way that you could either equip things to it or could pick things up, but it was mobile enough to drive around. We don't have to get into the real deep details, but I went far enough to figure out some of its basic functions, how it packages, how it unfolds, and there's a module bay up at the top. And one of the other questions that the Calty designers asked me was like, how do you control this vehicle? I don't know about a steering wheel, it's 2040. Are we gonna have steering wheels in 2040? So that was an interesting question that they asked us, and we might, but we might not. So I kind of went through a whole phase of wearable tech, like maybe it's kind of a Neuralink thing, or maybe it's something that works with your electrical impulses for your muscle and can control something, or maybe it's something you kind of put on your, it literally like Neuralink. So I basically landed on this final one here, which was sort of, it goes over your ear and it has a heads-up display and you can use voice command. So one of the things that they came in and asked us one of the weeks was, this is really cool and I like all your ideas, but can you actually illustrate how this is directly solving these characters' problems in the storyboard? So I went through a little round of sketches of okay, how are we going to solve problems here? So this sort of set of sketches here showing that module bay at the back sort of moving rearward and magnetically attaching to sort of a tiller, like a what do you call it? It's been a while since I've worked on this project, but and problem number 2, showing directly how the rear module bay of this vehicle can sort of the track width can increase and it can hydraulically lower the bed onto the ground. So I mean, if you've ever used a truck, that's one of the biggest issues, is lifting something into the bed and hurting yourself, especially if you're an individual, if you're the only person doing it. So I tried to illustrate in pencil, just kind of a storyboard of how this vehicle could transform a bit to make your life easier in terms of lifting and loading. So I went through a whole bunch of other scenarios. Like I said, I don't want to get in too much granular detail about it, but I thought this would be an interesting project to show you guys, because when it's one thing to do research and have a bunch of pictures off of Google and then have a solution, right? But what I would urge you to do is get really passionate about the theoretical problem-solving side. And if you actually go in and illustrate how the user is going to interact with this product and how it can actually improve their life, it can lead to a much more compelling final presentation. When you go to show somebody, they're going to say, wow, you really went in and thought about how this person is going to use this item, and you illustrated their scenarios where they're going to have difficulty, and that can kind of invigorate you to design an even cooler solution. So I had some interior sketches here, sort of an idea on how the wheel comes apart, and I did one sort of main sketch with everything torn down. And this was actually one thing I mentioned to Vadim in terms of his project. And when you have a product that's solving a lot of complex things, it is important to show maybe like a 60 or 70% understanding of how that product actually functions underneath. Because one of the values that you bring as a designer when you get hired and you have to work as a designer is, okay, this is a cool idea, but how do we take this thumbnail on a piece of paper and turn it into a $400 million product investment that we can make and make profit on? And it's very important, even in your student work, to show that you have a passion for figuring out how things underneath the skin of that product actually work. So this is just goes to show there's none of this made it in the final document for this presentation, but this was actually a 10-foot by, I don't know how long it was. It was a huge roll of paper, and I sat on the floor just sketching on it. This is a scan of that roll of paper. But there's my little package drawing for the vehicle there, and some more midterm illustrations for it. And so I think rounded up that project. I don't want to get into a ton of detail about it, but I think goes to show how important it can be to go past the initial stages of like, oh, I found some statistics on the internet and I think this is, the problem that I need to solve, and then immediately come up with a solution. Sometimes it's a journey of discovery, and you learn a lot more when you go in and you illustrate those problems and you really think deeply about it, even if you're just thumbnailing in your notebook. Think to yourself, how can I kind of break out of the mold of maybe what I'm conventionally taught about researching and developing a product? And I don't know how passionate everybody is about drawing or sketching, but even if it's just noodling in your notebook, it can be a really fundamental part of creating a compelling set of research and a story to go along with it, and then an exceptional product that comes out of all of that that's very easy to understand. So that's what I have in terms of, that was my junior year at CCS. I'll go through this very quickly. This is another thing about being a student and young professional. When you do get the opportunity to either do an internship or actually get hired somewhere, sometimes they will ask you to do a set of work for them. They'll give you a prompt and they'll say, all right, you get 5 days to do this. So this was a project that took 5 days. I was staying up till 2, 3 in the morning every night. But I had the opportunity to work at Rivian, so they gave me this assignment. Design a vehicle that fits in the future of Rivian's lineup. That was basically it. So I always thought expedition vehicles were quite interesting, and I thought, well, what if there was something that was larger than the R1S? It was sort of an expedition vehicle that could transform a bit and facilitate, off-road adventures. So I went into a little bit about how the IP can transform and how you can fold the load floor flat, and what if the interior of this vehicle could potentially become like a living space? It can be a 2-row SUV for a little while, and then you can basically fold everything up and set of stairs, and the roof pops up and you have a secondary roof up top, and it becomes kind of like a home away from home. So I spent a lot of time doing these illustrations, went into a little bit of how the IP can sort of fold, and this idea of materials having sort of a subsurface underlit material. So screens are obviously kind of a distracting element of modern automotive design. So what if all the surfaces of the interior could still display information, but they're also beautiful material and they're not a screen? So that was something I kind of integrated on the side here. We have this beautiful wooden IP, but it could also, through microperf or very thin veneer, you could show information through it, and then it can kind of hide away, and it's not distracting when you're on an adventure. Here's my final rendering, and I did another final rendering here. And I didn't get the job, and they didn't tell me why. So I guess the lesson here is sometimes you will kind of pour your passion and some of your coolest ideas into something, and it's not even you, really. The opportunity can sort of pass, and sometimes you don't understand, what happened or why. But I basically sent this project out, and they said we're not hiring anymore. And I was like, can I get some feedback, please? And they're like, no, we can't give you any feedback. And the lesson here, I would say, is like when you go to put together your final portfolio and you get ready for graduation and you're sending all your work out, they're just not going to go how you think that they're going to go. And you can put your best foot forward, and you can pull all-nighters and just do everything in your power, but sometimes you're not destined to be in one place. You might go somewhere else. So I guess that was kind of a little interesting story behind this project that I wanted to share, because when you're a student, especially when you're a young professional, not everything is just a clear, smooth road ahead. Sometimes it can be a little rocky. So now I want to show you, before I get to my very final stuff, I want to show you my sort of current professional portfolio. I think it would be sort of a good opportunity to show all of you guys what a I guess, passable portfolio for automotive design looks like. This is a bit old at this point. You know, I've been using this since I graduated. Because the other difficult thing is there's kind of a dead zone. Like, you've done so many awesome projects, and they've been, you know, they're at a point where you can talk about them. But when you're a young professional, you have your work from school, but once you start working, you know, if you end up looking for somewhere else to move or a different company, there's a lot of stuff that you've done in that time that you can't show. So this was my portfolio that I've been using since school, that gives kind of a good bookend to all of my skills and interests. So sort of my intro page here, very simply showing all of the different internships I've done during my school time, and then just briefly showing what I'm going to start with, and then, you know, all of the projects that I have in my portfolio. So start out with what I'm passionate about. I usually like to start a portfolio off with what really showcases who I am, even, you know, in the context of automotive design, but what I'm very excited about. And, you know, I'm into performance cars, sports cars, you know, Audis, Volkswagens, cool stuff like that. So these are just fun sketches that I threw in the beginning of my portfolio to kind of show who I am and what I like to do. So this is all Photoshop and sort of hand sketching. Here's another little render of that Mazda project that I did a long time ago that I'm sort of throwing in the intro here. And I guess I can briefly talk about this. This was an internship at Hot Wheels that I did, and they gave me the opportunity. Unfortunately, if you do get an internship at Hot Wheels, they always want you to do a production Hot Wheels, at least one. So I got to do these two here, the Electro Silhouette and Hologram, and it was so cool. The day that it came out, they let me know, that, hey, this is shipping with this next crate of Hot Wheels, and I was out like looking for them and spotted it on the shelf. I'm like, oh, I did that. So that's another neat little thing. If you manage to get an internship with Hot Wheels, it's a fantastic experience. I highly recommend it. Very fun. So I can just briefly sort of gloss through this, I guess. This was a senior year studio, an interior studio sponsored by Cadillac. So the way it worked at my school, CCS, and other schools like Art Center, and schools that are very specifically automotive focused, they'll usually try and find an automotive sponsor every semester. So this semester it was Cadillac, and it was a pretty simple prompt: just design the future of Cadillac. And so it was an interior project. So I sort of got real caught up in the sort of 20s, like roaring 20s and 30s elegance of Cadillac, and how that could integrate with a lot of sweeping forms that vintage and iconic aircraft have. So I sort of designed this IP to have a winged shape that came down and sort of supported the driver. One of the things that they prompted us with is design a different experience for the driver than the passengers. So a form study turned into a functional area. So I said, well, the driving area could be this presentation, ingress and egress to the cockpit, and that form that was created by this winged IP could actually create this really dramatic moving effect, so that when the door opens, it presents the driver's seat to you. That's exciting, as you know, as a driver getting ready to drive this car, and it's kind of congruent with being a pilot, you know, when the canopy opens and the ladder comes down out of the aircraft. So that kind of inspired that. There's another interesting point about details, and that's why it's really important to be very excited about materials and processes, and it's okay to get really geeked out and be a nerd about certain things. I got really caught up in the sort of the like 50s, 60s jet turbine nozzles that are on a lot of early jet aircraft. So I tried to integrate those themes into the thumb wheels and the steering wheel, so they have kind of a slotted thruster nozzle look to them. And I tried to repeat those elements on the inside of the airbag. Of course, there's no airbag in there, but it's just a concept. But that repetitious sort of straked form language I wanted to kind of repeat that and illuminate that inside of the steering wheel to give it kind of an aeronautic feel, but it's not like I'm literally putting a jet thruster on my steering wheel. So that was the idea behind this, and I did just a little ideation on how that could fold into the instrument panel when you're in a autonomous mode. And then one of the final details to this interior design was, for the passengers, how can I create a different experience? And I sort of thought of, like a first or business class experience in flying in an aircraft. What if the center console could be this almost like a steward on your flight, so the console moves up and it can sort of draw luggage from the trunk or anything that you request out of the trunk to you on a conveyor. So it's sort of reminiscent of flying on a luxury aircraft. And here are the final renderings of that interior. And this was one of the first projects that I learned how to use Unreal Engine with. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Unreal Engine, but it is a fantastic software for visualization. It's if you can get everything, it's a bit tedious to work with, but it's mind-blowing some of the stuff that you can create with it. So I was doing polygonal modeling. This was Modo, and then I brought it into Unreal Engine for my final images. So that was an exciting project. Going back to what I mentioned about your projects being 50% classwork, 50% passion. This was, I'll just kind of go through this quickly. This was a project that I had an idea about that was inspired by actually one of my favorite albums, but it was, it's almost like Inception. I illustrated the different stages of going through into a dream state and then waking up within your dream. And I illustrated those slides, and then I tried to develop form based on those different stages of falling into sleep and then becoming sentient within sleep, and then actually entering sleep through another stage of the dream, and then sort of awakening. It's very much like Inception, sort of awakening through those two layers of a dream. And I tried to sort of encapsulate that in a form, and I branded it Infinity. And here's just a little recap on those different stages of the theoretical dream that this forum is inspired by. And a couple people told me, maybe don't make a car out of this. It's a little bit, you're gonna put wheels on it and an IP and mirrors and stuff, and it's not gonna be as exciting. So I left this as kind of a forum study. But it ended up making it into the final portfolio, and this was just something that I was noodling on in my sketchbook at school that I got passionate about. I got excited about the story, and I spent a lot of time illustrating it outside of my classwork to then make it part of my portfolio. So I've got two more. I don't know how I'm doing on time here. Am I okay? Okay. I've got two more projects for my portfolio here. This was actually another potential internship that it sort of didn't really pan out, but I ended up doing this on the side during sophomore year, during all my VisCom stuff and everything. Basically developing this sedan concept for the Chinese market, for Bayek. This is a Chinese brand. But I came up with this idea of developing form for the vehicle based on three different historic and culturally important items within Chinese art. So poetry, calligraphy, and painting, the treatment of graphics and color. So I began this form study phase by essentially the basic proportion and the underlying surfaces of a vehicle. I was sort of inspired by poetry being this very simple and succinct underlying theme. So it might not be very granular in detail. It's a very short statement, but it embodies a very deep feeling of emotion, in language at least. So I tried to draw a parallel with that, with the underlying proportion and the basic surfaces of this car. If they're dramatic enough, they can elicit that sort of feeling. Here's a little bit further form development on that. And then I wanted to take a more literal approach, and I actually took some characters of ancient Chinese calligraphy, and I sort of stretched and warped them, and I used them to develop some of the graphics for the inlay on the glass going up over the cabin, and some inlays for how the vehicle's logo could be tied into the lighting up front. So taking a little bit more of a literal approach, but sort of figuring out how some of those characters could be sort of stretched and integrated into some of the details of the vehicle. And here's some further development on that. And one of the tasks that I was sort of assigned with was how can you tie this admittedly not very good logo into a front fascia that integrates well and it looks quite nice. So that was sort of my attempt there. And then the final stage of this process was the use of light and color and where it highlights very strong elements of the vehicle and where it darkens them and sort of subdues them. So that's sort of congruent with the art of painting, obviously, selectively adding details and highlights to certain areas and darkening and making subdominant and subordinate other elements of the piece. And so that's what I ended up with. That was my proposal, sort of a dramatic sedan. So, and then this actually is an interesting story. So I took a concept design course at CCS that I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to take. It was with Tim Flattery. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Tim Flattery, but he is kind of a renowned concept designer now in the industry. I mean, he's done like the Batmobile, and he worked on Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner. So he brought in all of his gouache and airbrush paintings and showed us like the vehicles that he did it was just so cool. And I took his course and I had my final studio at school, and it was an open studio, basically make whatever you want. So I was inspired by that concept design process a lot. And what was fascinating to me is, I think when you're in your respective major, you have a high opinion of it. Transportation, car designers are the most talented people because we have to deal with surface and safety regulations and restrictions and everything. And then after I took his class and I was sort of sat in the room with other actual concept artists at CCS, I was like, I don't even know anything. I don't know how to do anything. It was like they know anatomy, they know like form, expression, they can do hard surface like this, but they know how to animate, they know how to storytell, they know how to thumbnail. It's just incredible. So I was really inspired by that process, and I wanted to make my final studio at school that. So I created kind of a backstory, which is by the year 2070, Earth is kind of a grim backstory, but I think it resulted in some cool hardware design. But in year 2070, the Earth is very polluted, and all the people who can afford to leave Earth and live on Mars have left. So there's basically a faction of people that have to kind of scrap together what they can to get off Earth. So that was sort of my backstory there. And I took a lot of the techniques that I learned in Tim's class to put together some of these keyframes to set up the story. So it's basically like a last hope, building these shuttle orbiters to get up into orbit to build a generation ship to leave Earth orbit to go to Callisto, which is an icy moon of Jupiter. But it is, radiation levels are not as high as a lot of other moons and celestial bodies in the solar system. But it could potentially be an attractive location for setting up civilization, if not on Mars, because there's a tremendous amount of liquid water under the surface of Callisto. So having that whole scenario laid out, I thought, what am I designing? I'm designing, it has to be some kind of surface vehicle, right? And that was also, my professor at the time. He was like, make sure you design a vehicle, okay? He's like, the space stuff is really cool, but this is transportation design, so like make sure you design a vehicle, all right? I don't know where you're going with this. So I thought, okay, for this part of the story, this is obviously like a discovery phase. You're landing on the surface, sort of exploring, and you're bringing everything you have with you. So this has to be sort of maybe an RV-sized 4 to 6 person vehicle that you can live on for an extended period of time. And I started ideating around the power source, so nuclear, of course, for outer space, for anywhere that you don't have fossil fuels or a ton of light all the time. Nuclear is your best and most dense power source. So, the radiator fins are at the back because there's no air, but going through all the research on these different power sources and how it can kind of affect all these details, how they can affect the design of a vehicle, it was pretty interesting, because it's constraints that are just not of the earth, it's not aerodynamics, and it's not like plastic or metal, or it's like, this vehicle has to have a nuclear reactor, and stuff like that. So I was also very inspired by Soviet-era snow crawlers, because it's a similar use case. You're on an Arctic expedition for months, and the vehicle that you're in is all that you have. So a lot of these vehicles were quite interesting. They're as big as a room, and they had bunks, and they had a kitchen, and they had a machine shop. Yeah, you could hang out in them for a long time. So I was inspired by some of the form factor behind those vehicles, and then I started to get into some of the ideation, the more final ideation behind this design. I'll just go to the cutaway view, sort of designing from the inside out. So four bunks, and then sort of a basic interior volume, but logically it might have to have an airlock so that you could get outside of the vehicle. And what else do you need? Oxygen tanks, liquid water tanks. So I designed those into the hull of the vehicle. And of course, this is another important thing I was actually telling you, Vadim, is it's good to know enough about how things work to tell a compelling story, but you don't want to go so deep into research that you actually try to start to design the real thing, and then you just spend a bunch of time in CAD, and then you get lost and you don't even know what you're doing anymore. So some other details of this vehicle, I thought, well, I want it to be packaged on a lander, right? Because it's got to land on the surface somehow. So that's part of the reason for this V-shaped hull. It actually packages radially in a lander, which I'll show later. But the wheels will have to be sort of sucked up in the vehicle, and when they deploy, the surface is entirely ice. It's a very harsh surface. So I thought, well, these wheels, they have to be very rugged, maybe a titanium skeleton, and then they have lugs that pop out. So fully metallic wheels that can kind of grip the surface. Here's another sort of final rendering of this vehicle to show scale. And this is where I started to design the other part of the story, which is how does this whole system end up on the surface of the planet in the first place. So this is the lander portion. There's the entry airlock up there, and these chutes that distribute into the airlock in the back of the vehicle that's deployed onto the surface. And they have these sort of fairings that cover them, and when you land on the surface, I'll show you in a second. So that's the lander portion, and then just enough to tell the rest of the story, I kit bashed together this generation ship that would be built in orbit. And so essentials that you might need: a gravity ring. So, at some points in time, you could actually experience 1/3 Earth gravity. Habitat wings. So, that's logically where you might stay if you were on the ship, and then fuel storage. I wanted it to fit the story, and that it's not very clean and sort of Starship Enterprise. It's very scrapped together and sort of made of, which is very convenient because I didn't have time to model all of this, so I ended up kit bashing a lot of it. And then here are just some of the final images showing that lander vehicle and how it deploys on the surface. So the rocket lands on the surface, it blows that fairing off, and then these intermediate legs sort of pivot up and connect to the front of the vehicle and pull it down a conveyor. And I sort of did enough of the engineering just so this is what you do with concept design. You have the elements there that would theoretically function, but the time to spend actually and engineer this would be extreme, because this was just a 3-month project this semester. So, and so that was my very final project at CCS, which was controversial because it wasn't a car, and my professors really wanted it to be a car, and they're like, well, what do you even want to do? Do you want to design cars, or do you want to do this, this fantasy stuff? And I was like, I don't know, I kind of like this, which I guess is another great point. It's okay to get so passionate about something during your schooling to decide, maybe my future is in this. And, it's up to you whether or not you decide to alter your course. But if you are so deeply passionate about something that something like this just comes out of you, maybe that's what you should do, for your career. I had a lot of discussions with Tim and with my department chair about these types of topics. Like, what do you really want to do? It's kind of a come to Jesus moment. Like, do you want to go into car design, or do you want to do this type of stuff? So that was my professional portfolio. So even though that's very entertainment, sci-fi, I still like to show that even when I'm looking for a new automotive job, because it shows what I'm really passionate about, what I like to do, and in my free time, or where my brain is some of the time. And it can showcase other skills that you otherwise wouldn't show if you get really specific about, okay, only interiors in my portfolio because I want to be an interior designer, or only exteriors. So, yeah.
So Don, I saw that you mentioned that you were really into entertainment design and stuff like that. What led you towards transportation specifically instead of entertainment?
I would say because I didn't have enough money to do 4 years of entertainment after that again and restart school, and I didn't have a big enough body of work to immediately. Tim was kind of somebody who could catalyze your entire career, and I wasn't at that level that he could take my work and go to California and be like, you gotta hire this guy. I just didn't have the track record. A lot of the students that he worked with were absolutely just prodigies in entertainment. And I'd already done 4 years of automotive design. And it was my best bet to start working. And I really did want to design a production car one day, hopefully. And yeah, if I hadn't, just recently I was able to do my first full size at Acura, which was the coolest experience ever. So I finally have something that's there. You can probably imagine your first full-size concept car that you did. And I'm very glad that I stuck with transportation, because it's a slim chance that you can become a successful concept artist, but it's a really slim chance that you can design a concept car, especially one that faces the public. So I was just glad that I stuck with it, and always had the knowledge that if you're passionate enough about anything, you'll figure out how to do it without needing proper schooling, right? You're just going to figure it out if you're that excited about it. So I always figured if I really actually wanted to get into it, I would be excited enough to continue working on my skills and figure out a way without having to go back to school. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, question for both of you. Other than like a great portfolio or resume, what have you found helps you stick out in the interview process or getting a job, maybe networking? And then I know you've probably had experience hiring people. Like, what do you kind of look for other than just like great portfolio and resume?
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to interview a number of designers that we've hired at Kia, and some we didn't extend offers. I think one of the most important things for a candidate is their passion, and much like what John explained, I thought he explained it really well, is you want somebody who is there because they're passionate about design and not just because they want a job. That's probably, I would say, the most important thing.
I would say one of the most important things is how you present to somebody in an interview situation, how you come off. Because I haven't been working for very long, but I have had the opportunity to view portfolios of potential hires, and then you think it's some very, very closed-door, professional sort of process, but it really is just human beings hiring other human beings. So if you aren't a very nice person, it doesn't matter how good your work is. In fact, your work can be significantly less polished than somebody else's. But if you are proven through word of mouth or recommendations from other people, or just the way that you interview, if you've proven that you're a great person to work with and you add a lot of positivity to the team, you're definitely going to get hired over somebody that is like a social media, Instagram hotshot, and they can't even look at you and address you properly in an interview situation. So that's like 50 or 60% of it is who you are as a person. And then when you're interviewing, I think it's pretty important to show things that you are genuinely passionate about. Like if you like to crochet or something like that, or just any hobby or interest that shows that you're inquisitive and you like to learn outside of just figuring out how to put a resume and a portfolio together. That can really, it can create like a human connection with somebody that's interviewing you. They could be like, oh, I like that thing too, I didn't even know that. And I would say being passionate outside of work, even if it has nothing to do with what you're doing, and somehow showing that to a potential employer, it's a really good thing to see. Like nobody wants to hire somebody that doesn't seem like they do anything interesting at all. They just kind of come in and produce work and then leave. So I would say that as well, yeah.
And I just want to say a few more things, some of the more common sense things when you are interviewing. You definitely want your work to speak for you. Don't try to be, talk too much about some of your work. You can kind of sense your interviewer to see their interest and really try to read your interviewer as you're going through the process. And it's very important to make sure you screen your portfolio with fellow students and also your instructors, because a lot of times we'll see, we'll be, a few of us managers interviewing a potential candidate, and most of their work is very nice, but then there's a few pieces that we just really question why they would put those pieces in there, and they may have a reason why they really, maybe it was a certain connection they had with a personal issue or something with the project, but make sure you screen it with your peers and your instructors. I think that's very important.
Actually, I can add to that. That's a really interesting thing that you bring up, because I've had peers that I went to school with that I knew were kind of an edgy personality, and then you always run into each other again. That's another thing. But I'm sort of working at Honda or GM, and then you receive their portfolio, and it's important to you can have a strong personality, but tone it down a little bit and edit yourself a little bit, because there are a couple projects. Like I remember one of his pages, it just had like a swear word on it, and it's like, I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to be kind of quirky and interesting and like catch my attention, but somebody else who's going to look at this portfolio is going to be like, what's this guy doing? Like, this guy seems like an idiot. And you might not be, but you just make sure that your work, that there's not one thing in there that really throws somebody off, that makes them question why you even included that. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
And I think this is very helpful, everyone. You want to be very professional. Even, when I started working at Ford, we were wearing ties every day, and that was kind of the dress code. Now we're much more casual, at least in the auto industry, and even if your interviewers come dressed like me, or sometimes we'll have our Kia hoodies on, but you really want to make sure that you make a great first impression. I'm not saying you need a suit or an elegant dress of some sort, but dress very nicely and be very respectful. Become a professional.
All right. Thank you.
Any advice for sketching to make it, John, I know you touched on it, but just to make it more efficient and not noodle, any advice would be appreciated.
What would you say you're struggling with in terms of sketching right now, like to start this
Maybe
conversation?
like perfectionism, or just like not being able to put things out quickly.
Mm-hmm. Oh man. So I went through many different phases of learning how to sketch at school. I'm trying to rack my brain right now. So when I started at CCS, when I would do a pencil sketch, I would try really hard to make it look like I did it quickly, but it might have taken like 8 or 9 hours for one sketch. And there's no, maybe this ties in with like, some of the modern tools and AI discussion, but there's no shortcut around it. One, there's discipline. You have to just put your pencil down. And 2, you have to do it a lot, like a lot. And you're gonna make some really bad sketches, but you just have to leave them. Like you just have to stop and leave them. And one of the things that I did was I watched other people sketch a lot. So somebody who I thought was really proficient at sketching, I would just watch. If I saw them working at the, community table or something like that, I would just stand there and just watch them draw. And then you realize that, they might be a couple years ahead of you. They do something different with their pencil that you didn't even, like I remember when I figured out spinning my pencil, like, because, you got to sharpen. I started sketching with black colored pencils too, because the contrast is higher. If you're sketching with like the Verithins or something with like a harder, it's taken forever to lay down value. But I started using just straight black colored pencil because you can, but the tip kind of breaks or it gets, it gets kind of smudgy quickly. And I remember when I figured out that if I spun the pencil while I drew, I could basically sharpen a point and then I'd go in and kind of tip it up and do like the precise lines that I needed to in a couple hits. And then I'd go back to shading, spinning the pencil. And I remember when I figured that out. That was a big efficiency thing that I figured out. And it had to do with watching other people too. But I would say like top 3 things are like limit yourself, like just move on. Just move on. Just allow yourself to make crappy sketches, because I still make crappy sketches. Like if I'm noodling, if I make a thumbnail, some of them still kind of suck. So it's okay. It's all right. As long as the idea is captured, that's all that matters with a little thumbnail. 2, really study the technique of people that you would say are proficient, really, really good, and watch what they do. And just look at their sketches and look what they do with their technique and see if you can maybe integrate some of those things. And maybe just those 2. I don't know about a third, but that's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little to that. When I started the transportation design program at CCS, sketching was such a big part of it. And we were told early on that by the time you graduate, you're going to do 10,000 sketches. And just sketching over and over, we would get weekly assignments where we would have to do 20 drawings, and each one of them had to be a different perspective. And it wasn't just small drawings. We had to fill 24 by 36 inch newsprint pads. So, we had to lay it down standing up, and it was almost a physical thing, because you had to step into it. It wasn't just, you tend to, if you've got a little small sketch pad, you kind of just draw from the wrist. And we were taught to really draw from your shoulder and move your body into it. And the more and more you draw, the better you'll get. So it's just a matter of time. Draw.
Okay. Thank you. Hi. I was wondering, just kind of as a follow-up question, do you prefer pen, pencil, Photoshop? Like what kinds of media do you use and prefer, and for what and why?
You're probably not going to like my answer here, but I don't really even like drawing on the Cintiq anymore. I actually just do a sketch model, and then I just chop it in Photoshop very quickly with the mouse. I pretty much just mouse render now, because it started hurting my back a lot. You're sitting there for 3-4 hours, like, it started hurting my back. So I kind of refined a technique to where I could make these really, really expressive renderings with just a mouse. So, but if it's not that, I really still prefer sketching with a black colored pencil on a piece of marker paper, because the texture you can get, you'll be surprised. Like, if most people are doing one thing, then do the other thing. So most people are using AI, and they're doing Photoshop, and they're using VisCom, and everybody's stuff starts to look the same. one of the most noteworthy things about me that people would always talk about when I was at internships or even when I would apply to jobs, I would put pencil sketches in, or I would just sketch with pencil. And they're like, I haven't seen somebody sketch with a pencil like that in a really long time. And they're amazing. I would rather you just sketch with pencil instead of doing all this flashy, super glossy, crazy iridescent Photoshop renderings. So still picking up a marker pad and doing expressive pencil sketches. It's one of my favorite mediums. Aside from Photoshop and mouse rendering, that's what I would go to. Because it's very, it's very expressive. It's like just you and a pencil, and you can't really, control Z on it. So, yeah, that's what I would say.
Anything from you?
Yeah, and I agree with John. Even today, like if I'm sitting at my desk, I prefer to just take a ballpoint pen and sketch on a small pad. But as a student, I think the drawing large and doing as many sketches as I could, I think really helped. So when I go into a much smaller format, it makes it much easier. So it's, it's very personal. Now, we didn't have tablets when I was a student, so, we were told to specifically sketch a certain way. So, I mean, if a tablet works for you, great, or if a Cintiq works. I know a lot of the designers were, at IKEA work on Cintiqs, and I also know a lot of them are developing back issues because of the posture. These guys will be all day, and they're kind of in a mode like this, and the company has invested in some ergonomic apparatus to help them, so they can kind of elevate it so they can sketch standing up, but so many of them still sit there and sketch on these Cintiqs. I think it's more important to be standing up and really get your body into it so you don't create any problems.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
A quick question for both of you. For being professional in the industry for a lot longer than a lot of us, how do you guys often maintain your motivation and keeping up your work habit with, especially short deadlines and a lot of deliverables for these projects? How do you maintain that timeline?
It's something you love to do. I mean, we're fortunate to be in a profession that's very exciting. I mean, it's visual, it's creative. I couldn't imagine being, in a cubicle all day working on spreadsheets. So it's a challenge. The deadlines can be very difficult to meet, but you always seem to be able to meet them, and it makes you feel really good. And it's you develop a certain defense because you when you put your work up on the wall, even as a student, I mean, it's visual and it's personal, and you get used to that after a while, and it's just something that you love to do.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was about to say pretty much the same thing. I think maybe the conversation of burnout, I remember when I was in school, people would talk about getting burnt out a lot, and I guess it's more focused when you're a student because that's all you're doing. So it's just day in, day out, you're just working on your assignments, and it can be a lot. But I would have to say, my dad was a teacher too, and for a while, he really tried to see the potential in everybody, but I guess the less glamorous answer I could say is if you're really having to force yourself to complete every assignment like it's torture, it might not be what you should do with your life, and you should be asking yourself that. It's a really important question to ask yourself that. We only have 70, 80 years on this earth, maybe 90 if you're lucky, but what you do with your time is actually really important. And if you find that that it's near torture to continue creating it, you might not be, there might be something else that you would be better at. Because I could say a lot of people at school told me, you got to slow down. You're going to get burnt out. Like, I don't know why you're doing this. And even at work too, you know, I'd be working on 2 or 3 separate projects just because I wanted more opportunity and I wanted to work on something different. And like, well, you're going to get burnt out. You're not even going to know how to draw after a while. And I haven't felt that. Because I really love doing it. Because I've always just done, it's always just come out of me. Like, I taught myself how to 3D model, and you know, when I was a kid, I wasn't really out on the playground. I was like modeling planes and cars and stuff like that. So I was just so drawn to it. I've always been really drawn to it. But I guess that's the answer of like of somebody who is through and through a creative. But I will also say that it's very important to recognize that you are a human and not a robot. So one of the most important things to maintain motivation is to just completely stop and not do what you're doing anymore for a little while. Like, just go outside, like literally just go for a walk or something, or go down to the pier. Like, there's so much cool stuff here. Just go do anything different. And it's kind of a primal response, right? Because when you put your brain in a different scenario where it has to suddenly deal with a different set of tasks, you're going to use different parts of your brain, and then some of the answers and the solutions to the problems that you're having, like at school or with your projects that you're working on, they're just going to kind of come naturally because you're not forcing that pattern of thought anymore. So I would say that to stay motivated, you have to. It's weird. It's kind of like a oxymoron or something. But to stay motivated, like, stop doing what you're doing, do something else for a little bit, and then. Yeah, you can't just strap yourself to a desk and work for 3 months straight without any sleep, or it's just, you can't do it. You're not a robot. So the thing that would help me the most is just spending time doing completely not what I'm having trouble with, like at school or at work. That's probably the best thing you could do to combat like burnout or motivation. It's just, if there's something else that you want to do that you're more excited about, just go do it. You know, it's okay. As long as you're not like serially missing deadlines and not showing up to work and stuff like that. Just let your mind do something else. It's okay. Like, nobody's watching you, you know, all the time. It's, you know.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit to that. I think those are great comments. When I started CCS, I mentioned that there were 60 students who wanted to become car designers, and we eventually got down to 13 students in our senior year. And it wasn't just the most talented students who made it to the senior year. It was the students that really wanted it bad, and I really wanted it bad, and I was not one of the top students very early on. It was a lot of hard work. I saw a lot of talented students who perhaps suffered from the burnout. Maybe it wasn't they just weren't that passionate about it. They were very talented, but their work just never seemed to get beyond a certain point. So, you got to ask yourself, do I really want to do this? Because in order to succeed, it's going to take a lot of hard work. And, I'm sure you had, and I know I've talked to Abby, I mean, all-nighters were a common occurrence when I went to school. I know I did an all-nighter in my very first week. And, I constantly did all-nighters. And you just got to keep working at it if you really want to do this for a profession.
Thank you.
Hi, John. Hi, Eric. I wanted to ask two questions. First question for John. This is the question. So for John, how did you adapt your design techniques and approaches when transitioning from being having student projects to professional work at GM?
That's a pretty good question. So it's funny, we actually say this about GM. GM is just CCS Part 2. But CCS is the school I went to, College for Creative Studies. Yeah, so GM was basically just CCS, like extended version. Yeah,
Except you got paid.
Except you get paid, which is actually really nice because you don't get paid when you're a student. So, but you think that once you graduate, I thought this too. It's like once I graduate, and I would say that I had maybe a wider skill set than most students when I graduated. It's like, oh, I'm good. I can just kind of have a life and just design cars, and it's going to be easy. And it's like, no, it's like you're going back to school again. You don't just naturally switch into like, okay, I'm designing real cars, now I can perfectly sketch real cars or real products, or perfectly work with these engineers. And you just have to go through another phase of education. And if you go to a good company that invests in its talent, like you want to kind of talk around and see which companies are more lean and that are hiring professionals that are really up to certain tasks and really fine-tuned for those tasks, or companies that hire a wider pool of talent that want to invest in that talent and sort of shape them to be the perfect role at that company. And like GM was that for me, for sure, because it took me out of school and they put me on a production interior program, and I didn't know how to do that. So they paired me with a mentor, which funny enough was actually somebody that I went to school with who was about 2 years above me, and who was really good at production interior. And I basically just started another full education course on how to design real cars. So I would say you don't need to do anything drastically different when you start working somewhere. You're going to have new tasks that you'd never dealt with before. But any good company invested in design is going to recognize that you have very strong talents, and those talents can be sort of shaped and applied to the products that they're developing now. So you don't have to, start working and suddenly be a prodigy at designing real products. You're going to go through another lifelong, I'm still learning, right? So it's like you won't stop learning. You're just going to keep discovering and learning, and it's like you're just continuing school. But you're getting paid, which is cool. Yeah.
Thank you for that answer. And then also for Erik, I was going to ask, what were the key differences in your design process when transitioning from tape drawings to digital modeling, and how did you adapt to the new technology?
That's a really good question. In fact, I treated the digital modeling very much like a tape drawing. Starting off in the side view, working the lines very much like, I think a lot of the experience that I learned doing the tape drawings really applied to the digital modeling. Now, some of the software today, such as Blender or Modo, they're more surface-oriented softwares. I'm not experienced on those applications, but Alias and CDRS was curve-based, and it was all about your curves. You would create your lines in side view, in front elevation, and of course plan view, and then you would just start connecting with curves, and you would be able to create your surface based on that. So there was a definite connection between doing a tape drawing experience with computer modeling.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thanks.
You as well.
Hello, I just had a quick question. So I just kind of wanted to know, like in your design process, I'm not sure if it would completely apply or not, but I was just kind of wondering how you interpret or perceive whether it's a given prompt or it's certain design style, like a car type, model, brand, whatnot, and how do you apply that to what it is you're designing? I just kind of wanted to get some input on that.
So your question is how do you dissect design language and then kind of apply it to what I guess you could kind of break it down into three different things. I think you learn, especially going through school, breaking things down into three different things is like a process that the human brain likes a lot, especially when you make a presentation. You got rough sketches, renderings in the model. It's like 3 different, but I would break this down into surface, like how a brand treats their surface. Like, is it very like positive? Like, are there no negative surfaces at all? Like Mercedes or Porsche, is it very clean and uninterrupted? And is it more defined by the detail, graphics and cut lines and stuff like that? So how does that manufacturer treat like the surface of their product? And then 2, what do they do with their details? Like, do they repeat a lot of small elements? Or do they have a lot of irregular elements? Or do they emphasize like light and dark materials? Like, you have to look at, in the areas that are of higher visual interest, what are they doing in those areas? And I guess that's a really good question, honestly. And your question is how would you then translate that to your work?
Right.
I'll be honest, it takes a lot of, so creating something new, especially in the context of a brand that already exists, you have to build up a visual library in your mind of what sort of has already been created in that context. And it just takes a lot of practice and time, but experiment. Don't be afraid to push boundaries a little bit and say, well, this brand, they like very smooth and positive surfacing. Maybe I will try something different with it, but make sure to include enough elements that identify with that brand. Like if it's a certain repetitive detail, maybe that is a strong element, like Porsche uses like 4s, like a grouping of 4 frequently. I don't know where they're going next, but or Mercedes puts those little stars everywhere. Like they put their little logo, they kind of pepper it everywhere, and you can sort of pick up these motifs that are repeated in their product lineup, and you can use that, to kind of identify with that product. But I think an important thing about being a student, especially, is also having something to say and coming up with maybe an adjacent or furthering like a current language, design language. So I wouldn't be afraid to also maybe not perfectly align with the design language. Like if you're designing a product for Dyson, for example, and most of their products are very like primitive volumes, like cylinders and cubes and radii and stuff like that. And maybe don't be afraid to introduce a different design element into that language. But there is going to be a rule set that brand holds on to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be anything, right? It would just be, another brand. But there's going to be a sort of a big picture, like surface, proportion, volume rule. And then there's going to be a more granular, like subdominant details, repetition of details, materials and finishes. I guess I could say just look, like really get enthusiastic about looking and dissecting, like what is going on in this picture? What is this product doing? Like, why are they using that material? Or like, why did they design it like that? Like, and catalog that in your mind. And the more you have that in the back of your mind, the more you can kind of create in those boundaries and say, oh, this is a new product for this brand, or something like that. But it takes a lot of practice and it takes a ton of looking. Yeah. I don't know, I feel like you might have a much better answer.
No, you did a great
question.
job. No, that's fine. He covered it pretty well.
I'm also just kind of curious, at least for transportation design, if you were how would you consider things like aerodynamics when designing certain vehicles? Is there a science to that, or is that something you think about when you're doing your idea, your sketching and developing and whatnot?
This is an interesting one, yeah.
Yeah, aerodynamics can be a tricky thing because sometimes you create a form that you would think it would be aerodynamic, but it very much isn't. Like for a very aerodynamic car, you want to pretty much truncate the rear end with a hard pretty much a slice. You don't want it to be soft in the rear because then the air gets disturbed as it rolls off the surface. So I mean, there are some things, obviously a soft front end that leads into the windshield and over the roof line is important for aerodynamics. So it's easy to create something that looks aerodynamic, but a little bit more difficult to make it very aerodynamic. Sometimes you'll send a model to the wind tunnel and you're surprised about how bad the numbers are, and then you kind of learn from that.
Yeah, I could say, like my idea of car design when I was, in high school before I knew a lot about it is that all of these stages of the process are considered very carefully, like all the same. But then when you actually start working and you start, your executives come to you and they say, oh, reinvent this brand. We need to do something completely different than we've done before. You can't, aero is extremely important, but oftentimes you can't start with that. You need to start with something that's visually captivating, that can, if we can carry this feeling, then people are going to want to buy the car. That's the number one thing, and usually that's very abstract and kind of artistic, and then you'll do a 3D model of it, and you'll take it full size and make it look all pretty, and then you give it to the aero team, and they're like, this thing sucks, it's really bad. You got to completely change, this area of the, you got to change the fenders, or you got to lift the rear, or something like that, and it becomes another kind of excruciating process of problem solving. Like our package design teacher at CCS was mentioned about the 911, which is one of the most iconic, you could say the iconic pieces of design in car design history. It's shaped like an airplane wing, and that's like the wrong shape for a car, right? And the engine's also in the wrong place. So the shape of it, that sort of long teardropped rear, when you're at higher speeds, like 70, 80 miles an hour and above, it actually creates lift, so the rear axle gets light. It's actually horrible. It's really bad for aero. And so that's why every 911 has a active aerodynamic spoiler at the back to prevent it from wanting to crash when you go too fast. But aero is extremely important, and you might create something sometimes that flies in the face of that, and then you just have to start solving problems and figuring out how to get around that. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know you both kind of have a passion in car design, but personally me, I love design as a whole, but I kind of struggle to pinpoint exactly what exact field I want to go into. So maybe if you guys have any suggestions on like how to truly find the thing that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, or maybe like some tips on like what internships you should apply for if you aren't entirely sure.
Okay. Well, I would ask, what do you do as what do you find yourself doing when somebody's not asking you to complete an assignment? What do you find yourself doing?
Probably being around like people, I guess.
Okay. And there's an interesting answer there too. But what, just interacting with people?
Yeah. So I guess I do kind of have I kind of like help people. That's like kind of like a broad design kind of.
So you're interested in solving social problems or things to do, people interacting with each other. You like solving problems to do with that. Yeah. You say that you do that just naturally. Well, then I would say that you might be interested in, maybe if it's getting too granular, like you really don't like figuring out part lines and injection molded, die draft angles and stuff. You just don't like that at all. Then there are many other fields within design that it could be UX UI, like user interface, or it could be more of an architectural field, like interior design, like solving, I have a space and I need people to interact with this space in a way that makes them feel comfortable, or it leads them to do this, or maybe makes them want to buy this product or whatever. it sounds like you might be interested in a field that's more broad, that's more directly with like social behavior and directing how people feel or interact with a certain product. And I mean, there's plenty of careers in that. You don't have to force yourself to be a hard surface product designer or do car interior design or anything else. It could be. I mean, I'm not an expert in that, so I can't fully direct you, but I would say look to what you find yourself being passionate about outside of somebody telling you what to do. And if you can find a way to pair that with making money, then that's what you should do. It's exactly what you should do. Yeah.
Yeah, being a designer, I mean, it's you have the opportunity, especially for a product designer, when you're a car designer, I mean, especially exterior, it's pretty much the same thing. Maybe there's subtle variations depending on what project you're working on. But since I've become more focused on interior, there's a lot more things that you're designing in the interior. You're working with ergonomics, you're designing screen graphics, other elements that are within the interior. It's a lot more involved than an exterior where it's more of a sculptural shape. And just treat every project as a new challenge. I mean, you don't have to love a certain product to want to redesign it. I mean, it's just like a new experience. It could be medical equipment. I mean, that could be very interesting. There's so much that goes into medical equipment and reasons why it looks the way it does. And the same thing with toasters and microwave ovens and calculators. All the stuff. It's the great thing about being a designer is it's all fun, and you should be excited about working on all the products that you get an opportunity to.
Great answers. Thank you.
Hi, I just have one quick question, and I apologize for my uninformed question. I'm not really informed on like the automotive design part of it, but as car designers, what would you say is the biggest key factor or biggest key thing to consider when you're designing an actual car, whether interior or exterior?
How your leadership feels about it. That's probably the biggest problem that you have to deal with. At least in the beginning phases, is what the executives want. Yeah, because you can design, the best solution for the problem that you think exists, and people will have a different opinion of that. So that's one of the, especially being a younger designer too, and it's a different culture too. I think young people have more access to things, and they're more empowered to express their opinion more often, and that can hurt when you're in a professional environment and you're told that you're wrong. It's just wrong. We don't want that. That's one of the biggest challenges, I think. Which actually, it's funny because I'm talking about more of like an emotional kind of social thing rather than actually designing the car. But one of the biggest hurdles that you're not necessarily prepared for is how to integrate yourself into the team and be able to problem solve based on that team and that studio and what that company is looking for. That's really challenging. Because going through school and sort of building models and learning softwares and stuff like that, everybody has a pretty decent understanding of how to put things together or how to sketch, or because you're all there for a reason, right? You're professionals, you got hired. So everybody knows how to sketch a car, and everybody kind of knows how to put a car together and can create a compelling direction. But man, sometimes you can create the most compelling thing you could ever imagine, and it's just not what is required, And that's I guess that's something that I wasn't necessarily prepared for coming out of school and going into the car design field. It's just curveball after curveball sometimes when you're working on a vehicle program and competing for a theme and stuff like that. I think, but man, other than that, in terms of like physically creating a car, is once your theme gets chosen, the easy part is you're drawing your theme, gets chosen, and then you make a model of it, and then everybody's happy, and they're like, okay, cool, let's make a car out of this now. The production feasibility phase is extremely difficult, and it takes, some people are very good at it, some people some designers have a deeper understanding of engineering than others, and they know when to push or task production engineers with like, just figure this out because we need to figure this out. And some people don't, and sometimes it can wreck a whole theme, and something could get scrapped halfway through because it's not looking like what we thought it was going to look like, and it's going to be X amount of dollars more expensive to build this, and that's the really, really difficult part. I don't know if would you say that?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that we've been encouraging our design team before they start a project, rather than just jumping in and sketching what they think might look cool, is to think about the customer and also think about a strategy or even a story that they can apply before they start sketching. We want to really see something that's unique and really non-automotive, especially in the interior field right now, because it's, we keep hearing everything's been done before, everything's just a subtle variation. So we're really looking for something unique, and we have our designers, coming up with all kinds of non-automotive ideas, which we try to apply to the interiors.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have another follow-up question pertaining to something that you said, John. As I've been hired at a lot of different places and working since I was in high school, I've noticed that, some places are really great to work at depending on work environment and the people you surround yourself with. And I was just wondering what that is like, working in a studio so intimately with people and problem solving and trying to keep up the relationships between people professionally as well as personally, because you're there for such a long time working together. Mm-hmm. Have there ever been jobs that you decided to turn down, or maybe you exit yourself from because of issues, or maybe something you look forward to applying to a job for is the environment that you have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess I have two parts to this answer. I would say that there are, your personality and your style of work, there are studios or companies that you're going to feel more comfortable at than others. Like that's really how it is. Like companies, they each have a different culture pretty distinctively, especially when you're working with more artistic, art-brained people. So if you, I would say that the other part to that answer is you're also a professional too. So I've not gotten along with people at GM or at Honda or at Tesla or whatever, but you're also a professional, right? So you got to kind of put that aside a little bit. And I think a lot of people have this idea that once they get their first big, high-paying, good job, that everything's just going to be perfect and you're going to integrate with the team really well. And it's just not the case. I mean, there are, I can say that in terms of work style, there are going to be studios and companies that might fit your work style a bit better. Like when I was at GM, I was kind of, more of a, my brain's kind of all over the place. Like, I like designing space things and interiors and exteriors, and they kind of put me into one scenario and kept me there for a long time. And I was developing a professional skill set, which I'm actually very thankful for. At the time, I might have taken that for granted, but I learned quite a lot doing strictly production things. But I recognize that the style I like to work in, I wanted to be on the more advanced facing side. It just wasn't working out for me, and I was happy working there, but then an opportunity came along, and it was an opportunity. That's another thing too. It's not that you have to be working somewhere and decide that you're unhappy with it and kind of maliciously want to leave. Sometimes an opportunity will just float by, and you should take it. And even my manager and director, they were like, if you don't take this opportunity, like, it's kind of dumb. Like, you should probably go work there. So it's not always black and white, but I can tell you that I'm sure the answer that I wanted to hear when I was a student is that, like, oh yeah, some companies are so awesome, you're going to love the team so much, and some companies are really stupid, and the people there are not good, and you don't want to work there. It's like, no, you're a professional. Like, what you think or feel about certain things, you kind of have to, you just put that aside. You're there to do a job, and you're there to do it well. So recognize that it's not going to be kind of like a fairy tale situation where everything's going to be fantastic and awesome. Socially, you should be a professional and try your best at what you're doing. But if it's a work style thing, or you feel that something might be out there that would be better for you, then go do that. It's your career and it's your future. So if you make the determination that that's better for you, you should take that opportunity. But know that it's not always going to be exactly what you thought, right? Don't idealize every situation. So.
Learn that the hard way, for sure.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your opinion too. I know you talked about how you left to go deal with the big .com boom and then came back. How was that transition? When did you decide that you really wanted to focus on that and then come back? How was it coming back?
Yeah, it was a little bit surreal because when I came back to Ford, it was like I never left because it was such a short period of time. But it was almost like just going, to an off-site studio and working on a concept car. And many of the people that I worked with were people that I had worked with at Ford. It was only for a year. It was very exciting. It was a neat experience, but I felt like, I got it out of my system. I was very appreciative to come back to Ford, and, it was a very secure job, and, I was very, very happy after that. I didn't have the urge to up and leave to another risky venture. Although, of course, 5 years later, I did leave to join Kia, but that was not as risky as the .com.
Did you feel that you were secure enough with Ford that you could come back to it? Or what was your thought process leaving? Did you know?
You know what? Yeah. I wasn't sure. I didn't let that, cloud my decision to move on the opportunity because, I thought it was too much of an opportunity. Fortunately, I did leave on good terms. And by not going to a direct competitor like GM or Chrysler or Mazda or Honda, I think that went over, better. I always had a good relationship to the management team at Ford at the time, and they actually pursued me once they knew that our company was struggling. They came to me and said that, hey, whenever you want to come back, your job's open for you. So that made it a little bit easier.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I don't have a question, but I do have a thank you. So on behalf of our class, thank you so much, Erik and John, for spending and sharing your evening with us. We appreciate all the knowledge, the expertise, and the advice. So thank you so much for joining us.